this is very intimidating. People all around the place. I mean, this is a lot bigger than I thought based on like the pictures of the space. What do you guys think?
Very impressed. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but as we're short on time, so let's get straight down to business. I mean, we're honored to have today here on the stage two great entrepreneurs, one of whom is recognized as one of the most established investors in Europe and probably in the whole world, Neil Reimer, the founder and partner of Index Ventures, as well as another great entrepreneur who calls himself the least powerful CEO in the world, Ilkka Paananen, co-founder and CEO of Supercell. Welcome, guys. It's a really, really big pleasure to have you guys here. But let's get started. So when you have an investor that's invested in the hundreds of millions into an entrepreneur's company, I always wonder that how did you two meet? So Neil, stage is yours. How did you end up meeting this guy?
Yeah, you know, this is a bittersweet story for me because actually Ilkka was well known to my firm. My partner Ben had known him for a while. Had tracked his career, and we had a lot of respect for him and his co-founders. But somehow we managed to miss the A round. And we at Index, we try to make sure that we're not going to be too proud to admit when we've made a mistake. And I remember having a conversation with my partners about the fact that even though Supercell was doing well and the games were doing well, there was going to be a much bigger company built here, and I volunteered to go out and take a look at it. And I had never actually met Ilkka, so I called him up and asked if I could come up and visit. And I think a couple of days later we were in Helsinki with a pretty big contingent of people. Spent a day with him and the team, and I have to say I was pretty blown away in that meeting, and you know, we did more work afterwards, but we essentially made a decision then and there that we wanted to be part of the company.
So Ilkka, at that point with Supercell, you could have pretty much chosen any investor in the world into the company. So how come Neil? What was your impression of him when he came to your office a couple of days after your phone call?
As Neil said, we spent that day together. We spent a lot of time explaining what Supercell is about. We talked mostly about the culture and the way we've organized, and obviously we also talked about the games and the type of games we want to build. But we were mostly focused on the culture, and we took him around the office and did that type of thing. And it's just like, I mean, like very quickly, I think we became extremely comfortable with that Neil actually really understands what Supercell is about and what we are trying to do, and really kind of gets the culture. And for us, like when we built the company, I mean, people are always the most important thing, and it's not just the people internally and the Supercellians, it's also the investors and the board members, the advisors and so forth. And Neil just frankly seemed like a really great person to work with. And then I also had the luxury, I knew a few people who had worked with him before, where he had been a board member, and I just heard that Neil is, as a board member, he's extremely supportive and just a great guy to work with, and that's why we picked them.
And Neil, when did you make the decision that I want to invest in this guy, their team, and the company? When did you make the decision, and what was the thing that made you eventually decide?
I kind of made a decision in that meeting, but then obviously I had to bring my partners on board and communicate that to them. And really, if we were going to invest in Supercell at that stage, we had to be convinced that we were investing in a company, not in a couple of games. And what I saw, and what Ilkka was, so articulated so well, was that they had really reinvented the way you build a game company. The idea of cells, the idea of small, agile teams given a lot of freedom to build whatever they want, but then also submitting each game to the same bar, and knowing that a lot of those games would not be launched, and celebrating the fact that they killed a game with champagne, and celebrating a launch with beer. I mean, these kinds of ideas were not just Ilkka, were not just a sales pitch. They were completely consistent across the whole company. Everybody I spoke to could articulate the same philosophy and was completely bought into it and was at that company because of that philosophy. And that's really what got us excited. We also knew that in the next stage of growth, the company would have to be able to communicate that difference to be able to attract talent from all over the world. And we felt that that was a secret weapon that, that we wanted to invest in.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the kind of culture you built at Supercell, I mean, who are your role models? Who do you look up to? Who do you admire, like, to be able to build that great culture at Supercell?
I've been very lucky in a sense that I had the pleasure to work with like so many successful entrepreneurs, like most of which everybody would know. But if I think about like who I think are the true heroes of entrepreneurship, I think those would be the people that none of you guys has heard about. I mean, those would be the people who actually haven't been successful. Those are the people who have built a company and have failed. And despite the failure, they've kind of stood up and tried again, and then they failed again, and yet they're gonna try again. And I think in entrepreneurship and in sort of venture capital, we have this habit of always just celebrating the successes. But I think it's easy to celebrate the people who've been successful. I honestly believe that the real heroes are the ones who haven't been successful, and unfortunately, it's hard to name them. None of you guys would know them.
What about you, Neil? I mean, you and your brother, you were the pioneers of venture capital in Europe, building index ventures. So who do you look up to?
I tend to really think of investors as teams, as groups, as partnerships, because as much as people like to associate a company with one person because that person happens to sit on the board or is interviewed about a company, the truth is those decisions are made by teams. And at our firm, we feel that way very strongly. The partnership makes a decision. If it's a success, we all share in the success. If it's a failure, we all learn from it. And so I really think that I tend to think of firms, not individuals. And it's a very humbling profession. You learn new lessons every day, even when you've been doing it for close to 20 years. But I have to say that firms like Sequoia and Benchmark and Accel have done an incredible job over decades because they've worked as teams and also because they've managed succession in a very smart way.
Yeah, and actually, I had the honor of meeting one of the partners at Sequoia a couple of years ago in Silicon Valley, Rolf Botha. And he said, like he's very philosophically was saying that, 5-10 years ago, all the best deal flow in Europe as a Silicon Valley-based investor, he said that they came from United Kingdom, France, Germany. But in the past 5 years or so, they've seen this shift that suddenly the best deal flow is actually coming from Nordic countries like Sweden, Finland, and Estonia. So, I mean, why do you think this is? I mean, Ilkka, you've been a Helsinki-based entrepreneur. You founded Sumea in the year 2000, Supercell in 2010, and now it's 2015. So what has changed in the past 15 years you've been an entrepreneur here?
Well, first of all, I think there's always been a lot of extremely talented people in the area. But what I think has truly changed in the last 10 years, or actually I would say that in the last 5 years almost, is that the level of ambition today is significantly higher than what it used to be 5 years ago. I can only speak on behalf of the games industry, but just to throw in one example from there, I mean, say 6-7 years ago, if somebody from here had say 1 million players for their game, that would have been a huge thing. But then all of a sudden, Angry Birds happen, and these guys start to talk about hundreds of millions of players, and then very soon thereafter, about billion players. So if somebody next to you is talking about billion downloads, I mean, you don't want to talk about 2 million downloads. You kind of sound it sounds like nothing. And I think, like, say in the case of the games industry, like Rovio did us a huge favor by raising the bar for everybody. And I think that same thing has happened in so many other industries. If you think about companies like Skype and Spotify, and I could go on and go on.
What about you, Neil? I mean, you recently did with Index Ventures a report on cities. And an even interesting thing was that, among other things, Helsinki emerged as one of the most interesting cities currently. So, I mean, would some of the characteristics you found there explain what Ilkka was talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the quality of deal flow here is super high, especially if you consider the positive to negative ratio, right? There's less noise. The signal to noise, I think, is good. Entrepreneurs are very committed to kind of doing big things, not doing a kind of additive or marginal thing. But what this report has taught us about cities is, I think, very interesting. Basically, the report recognizes that entrepreneurship happens in cities, not in the countryside. So instead of looking at Finland or Germany, we should look at Helsinki and Berlin. And so they kind of analyzed 9 different criteria that fall into 3 buckets for all of these cities, dozens of cities around the world. They looked at a city's openness, so in terms of the data, in terms of their approach to entrepreneurship, legislation. They looked at the infrastructure that a city offers in terms of public transportation, broadband, store opening hours, facilities for people to sort of get things done on weekends. And they looked at leadership. How much is a city actually doing to sort of encourage innovation and entrepreneurship? And of all the cities in the world, Helsinki came second. Which is a pretty incredible performance.
That is pretty significant.
But what I think is interesting about this is that Helsinki and Finland have figured out that this is a major vector for the country, and they're completely bought into it. I mean, it's really an all-in bet, and you don't see that in many places in the world. In fact, I don't think you see that in any other place in the world to this degree.
Yeah, so the cliche question of that, do you have to go to Silicon Valley to start a company in the internet era? I guess your answer would also be that definitely not anymore.
I actually didn't hear what you said.
If someone, people always talk about that, do you need to go to Silicon Valley to be able to do a certain type of business? So I guess the case is not so much anymore that.
I don't think so. I mean, if you're looking at gaming, this is Silicon Valley, right? This is where you want to be if you're interested in building a game that will, will make, hundreds of millions of people passionate about your game. This is where the talent is. This is where the ideas are. This is where the experience is.
Yeah. But Ilkka, you often talk about, you invest outside of Supercell, and you've always been a part of the kind of the tech community here. So you have a lot of you want to help the kind of the entrepreneurial community around here as an entrepreneur based in Helsinki. So outside of Supercell, I mean, looking a bit forward to the future, what would you like to see happen? What is your kind of dream outside of Supercell?
Well, I have this very simple dream, actually. And the dream is that the next Google would be born from Helsinki. Obviously a very, very bold one, but if I think about the next 20...
Hey, come on, give it a big hand.
I mean, we are at Slush, so you're allowed to dream for once. But honestly, if you think about the next 20, 30 years, if you take a perspective that it's not about the next year, or it's not even about the next 5 years, it's about the next 20, 30 years, I think I can't see why that wouldn't be possible. I mean, we really have all it takes here in terms of the talent and so forth. But it'll take time, and more than anything, it's going to take patience. It's going to take a lot of mistakes. A lot of bold companies are going to go bankrupt. But if we try hard enough and we try long enough, I honestly think it's possible. And you know, I think a great example how many years it can take. If you look at like where the Finnish games industry is today, I mean that wasn't born overnight. I mean there's been a huge amount of people working extremely hard for the last 20 years, and look where we are today. As Neil just said, I mean Helsinki. I mean you could argue that it is like one of the sort of centers of gravity for games these days. But it took 20 years to get there. It took a lot of trial and error, and obviously it also took a lot of luck. But if you try hard enough, if you try long enough, it's entirely possible. That's my dream.
That is a very compelling dream. Neil, what do you think? Could the next Google be born here?
Yes, I do think it could be born here. We were chatting earlier about the fact that companies now, European-born companies, when they raise money at €1 billion valuation, or they exit at a 5 or 6 or 7 billion valuation, that's sort of taken in stride. We don't really stop the machinery and think about it. And I think that's a sign that our ambition goes much further than that. 10 years ago, it would have been a national holiday. But today, we just think these are steps along the path. I absolutely think that we're going to get there. And if I can answer that question as well about the dream, I mean, because I have dreams.
What is your dream?
I'm an investor, but I still have dreams. I actually have this idealistic view that entrepreneurs will solve all of the world's problems. I mean, the bigger the problem, the hairier the problem, the more interesting it is for an entrepreneur somewhere to derive a solution against that problem. And I think we need all the entrepreneurs around the world to do that, not just people from one part of the world. And my dream is that other places will follow this example. Helsinki is a shining example. By the way, I have to tell you how impressed I am by this event, by what your legacy and by the enthusiasm, but also the level of organization of this event. I think it's remarkable.
There's an amazing team putting this event together. Let's give them a big hand.
It's truly incredible. And the fact that you have 1,500 volunteers here doing this. So basically, I think if every city in Europe could follow this example and realize that this is the bet that they need to make, and get their governments and their entrepreneurs and their policymakers behind this, that would be huge for the world.
I like that. Entrepreneurs will solve all the problems of the world, and Ilkka's dream is that the next Google will be born in Helsinki. And if that entrepreneur or those entrepreneurs in that next Google are here, I'm sure that Neil and you guys are looking to invest.
Absolutely.
So that's a good ending note. Let's give a big hand to Ilkka and Neil.
Thanks a lot.